Connecting. All righty. Let's see, I see people are joining us now. All right, great. Give it a few minutes for people to log in here. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. I'm going to just give it a minute for people to start logging in here. What I'd like you to do before we get started is just go in the chat function and say hello. Let us know where you're from, how you're doing, what your interest is in this, in the Icehouse program or in entrepreneurship more broadly speaking. Just kind of say hello. Let's keep it conversational. You'll see there's a little chat button at the bottom of your screen. Just click on that. Type in, hey, hello, hi, here, where are you from? What organization are you with? There's Keith. All right. Hey, Keith, welcome. Thanks for doing that. Already certified. Okay, great, Keith. So you're just kind of getting a quick refresher, right? Waiting for your first class to start. That's great. Glad you're here. All right. So Khaldun is from Chicago, philosophy professor. Awesome. Steve is from Saranac Lake, New York, Adirondack Economic Development Corp. Perfect. Welcome, Steve. Just going to give it a few more minutes for folks to chime in here. Kind of a crazy time right now. It's an interesting time to be alive. That's for sure. Hope you guys are all staying safe and that this lockdown isn't, or this disease is not affected you, your health. Tallahassee Community College. Oh, good. Tallahassee folks going to be on the July training. Beautiful. Deanna Day, SB, North Carolina. Yeah. Sally. Wow, whoa, that was a bunch of people piling in. Economic Development, Salem-Dent County, Missouri. Looking for programs to help guide our community through figuring out how we can emerge from the current situation. Wow, Sally, you're in the right place. Linda from St. Paul College, completed certification in 2019 in Houston. Welcome back, Linda. Steve, always looking for new techniques. Todd, CTE director for, I can't think that it, Ardell Statesville School in North Carolina, Iredell, another North Carolinian. Yes, Scott, this is being recorded, so we'll send the slides. Good question. We'll send the slides after the fact. I'm going to go ahead and jump in now. It's about 11:03. Thank you all for joining us. So let me just kind of jump right in. I'm gonna leave the questions for the end. I'm going to kind of give you a broad overview of the Icehouse program, the course, the philosophy, kind of the structure of the course, talk a little bit about the impact, and then I'll leave time for questions at the end. Again, you'll all get the slides, you'll get the recording after the fact, so I'm going to kind of breeze through this kind of quickly. If you have a question, you can type it into the chat, and Joni, our operations director, Joni, is on the webinar with me, so she'll kind of assist there. Hi, Joni. Everyone say hi to Joni. Those of you who've interacted with her, you know she's the one that makes everything happen at Eli. So Joni's with us just to kind of help with the questions. If she can answer some of the questions along the way, I'll answer whatever questions at the end of the presentation. All right, so let me get started. I'm gonna share my screen now. Let's see if I can do this. All right, you all can see my screen. And I think I'm ready to go. Joni, am I good to go here?
Yep, good to go.
Yep. Okay, good. I want to make sure everyone can see it and can hear it. Okay, Entrepreneurial Mindset 101, an introduction to the Icehouse Entrepreneurship Program. Let's jump right in. I'm going to start with a 15-second infomercial. We are the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. We specialize in entrepreneurial mindset education. We do professional development, training, and courseware. And of course, the Icehouse program is, the course that is the courseware that we offer. So in this webinar, I want to go over the philosophy and the research behind the program. I'm going to talk about the features and the core structures, and I'll talk about the impact. I'm going to start with philosophy and research. So where I'm coming from here is the idea that the world has changed in ways that now require everyone to think like an entrepreneur. And I'm, purposely italicizing the think to get folks to understand. I don't necessarily mean that you have to start a business, but that these are the attitudes and skills that are now required for anyone to adapt and thrive in today's rapidly changing, highly uncertain world. And as we saw from some of the comments, that's what's needed specifically right now. And I'm going to try to make some of my comments germane to the particular circumstances that we find ourselves in. So here's I'm going to kind of run through a narrative. I borrowed this from Thomas Friedman's 2016 book called Thank You for Being Late. And he had this conversation with a guy named Astro Teller, who's the head of Google X Research. And Teller kind of laid this out on the back of a napkin, right? And he calls it Astro Teller's graph. So this curve represents the rate of technological advancement. And what's the name of that? Moore's Law. It almost went out of my head. Moore's Law is the idea that the computing power doubles about every 2 years. So that's, what Teller is saying is that technological advancements tend to build and accelerate on themselves naturally. But then you add Moore's Law, which is the idea that computing power doubles about every 2 years. And you get this accelerated rate of technological advancement. And so let's imagine that you're born in the 10th century. That's what this first dot represents. And then you somehow fall asleep and you wake up 500 years later. Not much has changed. Yeah, there's the printing press, but, the technological advancement is very, very slow over this period of time. So this third dot represents, let's say, the dawn of the 20th century. We're figuring out how to mass produce automobiles, and it's sort of disrupting the horse and buggy as the prominent mode of transportation. What Teller is saying here is that this disruptive innovation takes decades to really unfold. So we have time to enact laws. We have time to develop roads and rule systems around that and policies, right? And we have time to transition from making buggies to making automobiles, and so on and so forth. But what he's saying is that we're right now where the rate of change is happening so quickly, right? It's almost going straight up. So then he introduces the second line, which is the human ability to adapt. And this is, I think is quite startling when the reason I put this here is it's kind of a way, we all know that the world is changing very rapidly. We hear it every day, blah, blah, blah. This is a way to sort of illustrate that the rate of technological advancement has exceeded the human ability to adapt, right? And that's the frightening thing. I think that's what Toffler wrote about in Future Shock. Others have written about this, that someday we're going to reach the point where the technological advancement has exceeded our ability to adapt. Now, the human adaptability is a slower uphill slope. We got the printing press, we've got now the internet, and knowledge is ubiquitous, but it's still not keeping pace with this rate of change, right? So how do we bridge this gap, right? That's the real question that I'm trying to get to around entrepreneurship education. Like, how do we bridge that gap? And one of the things that Teller and Friedman discussed that sort of jumped out at me was that we have to optimize for learning. And we have to not only become learning organizations, as Peter Senge, started talking about in the 90s, we have to become learning individuals. And as Toffler said, we have to learn, how to unlearn, and how to relearn. And I think that's really the important thing. And, lately I've been doing some research into unlearning. It's kind of an interesting domain from a cognitive perspective, but I think that's really the point. And so I think it's also important to acknowledge that none of us has the capability to comprehend all the changes that are happening. I don't care how smart you are, what sector you work in, how many degrees you have, none of us can keep up with it, right? It's really quite frightening. So the point that I'm trying to make here, which I'm sure you've all already guessed, is that the entrepreneurial mindset is optimally engaged. And I'm not saying that entrepreneurs can keep pace and no one else can. I'm not saying that. But that people who have embraced an entrepreneurial mindset are optimally engaged. They're hyper engaged is another way that I think about it. And so let me dig into that for a second. First of all, entrepreneurs are those who are not only inventing new products and services, but they're improving existing. They're solving problems. They're improving the quality of our lives. They're creating jobs that are revitalizing our community. And one of the points that I want to make is that there's unlimited global demand for people who can think like an entrepreneur. And I don't care where you look, when you look at the 21st century skills that are required to adapt and thrive, they're entrepreneurial skills. So there's so much. So just don't call them entrepreneurial skills. We often refer to them as soft skills, which I find a little bit annoying because it sort of diminishes the importance of these skills. The other point that I want to make is that the entrepreneurial minded tend to be optimally engaged, while the vast majority of the workforce is not engaged. And you can look at the Gallup data on that. 2/3 of the workforce are not engaged. 2/3 of our students are not engaged, right? So how do we reconcile that, right? Is this something genetic? Is there some dispositional attribution here? Or are there some other factors that we can do something about, that we have influence over? So, you don't really need me to explain this, that entrepreneurial activity is also essential for creating vibrant, equitable, and sustainable communities. It's not just about empowering the individual with entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills. It's about revitalizing our communities, right? And to me, it's not just about the economic aspects of entrepreneurship. It's also about the psychological well-being, the level of engagement, and the human capital aspect. I don't think of entrepreneurship as just a purely economic driver, although it clearly is. So we're seeing big thinkers across the globe that are recognizing the need for entrepreneurship education. In the world, for example, the World Economic Forum recognizes entrepreneurship education as a societal change agent essential for developing the human capital necessary for building societies of the future, right? There's a really interesting paper published by the OECD in 2015 called Entrepreneurship in Education. And in this paper, they very well articulate the broader benefits of entrepreneurship beyond just an economic driver, right? There's increased societal resilience. And I think that's a really, really important point, especially right now. It's about individual growth, just personal growth as humans. We see a lot of data. We have a lot of data to show that when students are engaged in entrepreneurial activities, their engagement increases and their other academic achievement scores increase as well, right? And there's sort of an improved equality component here. I think entrepreneurship is a great way to empower people who have been locked out or left behind. There's an empowering aspect of entrepreneurship, and the Icehouse story is really about that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So I came across a piece that the World Economic Forum published some years ago that caught my attention, in which they said it's not enough to add entrepreneurship on the perimeter. It needs to be at the core of the way education operates. And so what we see, here we are, 2020, the world demands entrepreneurial attitude, behaviors, and skills. And entrepreneurship education initiatives have skyrocketed over the last 20 years on college campuses, small business development centers, community development, whatever. They're everywhere. Yet startups are in decline, right? So how do we square that peg? I mean, that's really the big question here. How do we shift entrepreneurship, from the perimeter, meaning, hey, we have an entrepreneurship program going over there in that other building. How do we inculcate this way of thinking into the entire organization? I would say, World Economic Forum said, let's shift from the perimeter to the core of the way education operates. I'm saying, let's shift it from the perimeter of society to the core of the way we think about how we contribute, how we learn, and how we work. That's really the big idea here. So in my view, the greatest obstacle to this shift, to sort of normalizing entrepreneurship, I'd like to say, my friend Tom Rue and I like to say democratizing entrepreneurship, right? How do we democratize it? Well, our ability to embrace entrepreneurial thinking is limited by the ways in which we define it. And I've had so many interesting conversations with so many people over the last decade or so that the word entrepreneur conjures so many different things for so many different people, right? And for a lot of people, they hear entrepreneur, they think of the Silicon Valley whiz kids at Stanford. They got big ideas. They're in some weird scientific space or technological space. They come up with a big idea. They get millions in funding, and then they become billionaires, right? A lot of people think that's what an entrepreneur is. And, let's face it, for the vast majority of human beings, students, whatever, that's either like just totally irrelevant or it's completely out of reach. And I think, we all love the rags to riches stories, but using these stories as exemplars of entrepreneurship is not helpful. And what the data show is that, these venture-backed startups are by far the exception. And Dane Stengler at Kaufman, the head of research at Kaufman, once said to me that, I've forgotten the number now, but it was a fraction of a single % of all startups are started with venture capital. So it really skews our thinking, not only about how to be entrepreneurial, but it skews our thinking about who can be entrepreneurial. And that's where the real problem lies, in my view. So, and some people think of entrepreneurship as just a small business owner. I don't want to open a Main Street small business. Not interesting to me. Some people think entrepreneurs are crooks, or they're just money grubbers, or this is all about making money and that's all there is really to it, right? And if you look up the definition of entrepreneurship, that's what it really implies. It's someone who takes a risk in order for a profit, which is, in my research, in 25, almost 30 years of research, is really inaccurate. Yes, that's like saying a dog is an animal with 4 paws. It doesn't really tell us much about the entrepreneur. And my point is, I think it's a mistake to think of profit as the tip of the spear. And I'll get into that in a moment. So I'm going to tick through this very quickly, but I think it's a useful way to see, from a macro perspective, what is entrepreneurship? All right. So this is borrowed from something called transformation theory from a guy named Dr. George Land. He used this to sort of describe the nature of change within any system, right? And the first phase is the discovery phase, right? That's when you discover something useful. The second phase is the growth phase. That's when you replicate the useful thing. And then the third phase is either obsolescence or reinvention, right? You either fade into obscurity or you reinvent yourself. The trick here is to understand which phase you are in so you know which rules to apply. Because The rules for survival in phase 2 don't work in phase 1. And the rules for survival in phase 1 don't work in phase 2. The rules for survival in phase 3 don't work in phase 1. And I could get into that in a little bit more detail in the Q&A if you want me to. But the point that I want you to take away here is that the attitudes, behaviors, and skills required to discover an opportunity are distinct from the attitudes, behaviors, and skills required to exploit that opportunity. Most of us have been normalized into a column 2 world, that we're part of sort of routinized value creation, where we expect to work in an established organization where the discovery happened a long time ago. Someone else figured out what is useful or discovered what is useful, and we're expecting to fulfill a predetermined role. I mean, that's where most of us live. And so, you know, yeah, some of us go off to business school and we figure out how to help large established companies reinvent themselves. But those are different attitudes, behaviors, and skills than entrepreneurial. And I'll talk more about that if I'm asked. So, a simple definition of entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity to create value for others, right? This is really a simple definition. It redefines entrepreneurship in a way that anyone can embrace. And it really kind of gets at the heart of what drives the entrepreneur, like where the intensity to the engagement, the motivation, the self-direction, the resilience, and all those factors come from, right? It's about figuring out how to make ourselves useful to other humans. And so, you know, I lecture to students a lot on campuses, and I say, you know, my way of thinking about this is, I'll use this Venn diagram, right? This take, you know, what are you naturally interested in, and what are you capable of being very good at? And when you kind of find the overlap of those two spheres, you have authenticity, right? And, you know, borrowing from something Naval Ravikant said on a podcast, right? You then are able to escape competition through authenticity, because no one can be you better than you can. So I see that as sort of the beginnings here. Like, what am I naturally interested in and capable of being good at? And then you overlap that with, how can I use that to solve problems for other people? Like how can I fulfill needs of others with my unique interests and abilities? And sort of, so we get in the center right here, that sweet spot right there is what we're trying to find in the discovery process. So, you know, this is, I started interviewing entrepreneurs for real in 2008. And I've since interviewed about 500 entrepreneurs all over the world. Not the big name entrepreneurs, but the underdogs and the everyday entrepreneurs, the misfits, people who have no particular advantage over anyone else other than the way they think. And so what I've sort of broken this down into 3 categories. I know there's a lot of text there, I apologize. But it starts with problem finding skills, right? You got to find the right problem to solve. Like, you know, God knows we don't need another coffee shop, right? We got to, it takes some time to understand, what do humans need? That shifts our perspective towards empathy. It awakens curiosity, right? We start to observe the bigger picture. As opposed to the employee mindset is like hunkered down, focused on one narrow sector of a problem, where now this entrepreneurial thinking, so we broaden the aperture. And we start to look up and around and like, what's going on here? What's missing? What could be improved? Once we find the problem to solve, then we work on the problem solving skills, which are creativity, innovation, critical thinking, experimentation, adaptation, collaboration, teamwork, networking, communication, resourcefulness, right? Those are, broadly speaking, you know, problem solving skills. And then lastly, you know, you need some self-direction. You need an internal locus of control. That's a deeply held belief that my fate is in my own hands. I'm not, you know, my life isn't controlled by others. You need to learn how to tolerate ambiguity, how to become a self-directed learner, how to become self-aware, and how to develop resilience, which is the ability to keep getting back up after you get knocked down and to learn from the failures. So that's really a brief overview of entrepreneurship. For a minute, I want to talk about what is a mindset. Lots of folks use this word without a lot of structure around it. I've scoured the literature. I've not been able to find any real meaningful clinical definitions of a mindset. And Carol Dweck, who wrote the book on mindset, calls it a way of thinking. So I'm defining it as the underlying beliefs, assumptions, and mental models that influence our decisions largely without our awareness. And that's the part we need to really emphasize, right? So I borrowed this idea from Edgar Schein, who studies culture. And I think, mindset can be thought of as our individual culture, and collective mindset is culture, right? So they're kind of one and the same, or it's useful to think about it that way. But what Schein and others have done is use this tried and true iceberg analogy, right? So what shows up on the surface is the outcome. That's the visible artifacts, observable behavior. That's the outcome of our beliefs. But just beneath the surface, the below the surface level is where our explicit knowledge and our espoused values lie. This is what we know and what we say that we value, right? But what Schein and others have demonstrated over and over again, what shows up on the surface is less likely to be the result of our explicit knowledge and more likely to be a derivative or the result of our implicit knowledge, our deeply held values, taken for granted beliefs and tacit assumptions. That's what shows up on the surface, right? So I like to say that I borrowed this quote from Deming, and he said, every system is perfectly designed to create the outcomes that it creates, right? I mean, we can all agree to that, right? So our schools are producing students whereby 2/3 of the students are not engaged, right? Yet we blame the student and we don't look at the system. 2/3 of our workforce is not engaged, right? And we blame the worker, we don't look at the system. But let's reverse that now to the individual. A mindset is a belief system that is perfectly designed to create the outcomes it's creating. And so what shows up on the surface is the result of our deeply held, mostly unconscious beliefs and tacit assumptions. So, after nearly 30 years of studying the mindset and the methods of underdog entrepreneurs, I've come to recognize there's this sort of the genesis, if you will, of entrepreneurial behavior is this core assumption that it's my responsibility to figure out how to make myself useful to other humans. And by doing so, I can empower myself. One of the points that I want to make here is I don't really think of entrepreneurship as a business discipline. And I tend to shy away from business terms like markets and segments and all these things. I try to break this down into first principles. We're humans and we're trying to make ourselves useful to other humans with our unique gifts, our unique interests, and our unique abilities. I mean, that's really it at the end of the day. And to me, that's the game-changing assumption. Now, that's usually a deeply held, mostly unconscious assumption within the mind of an entrepreneur. But it's also worth contemplating what is the opposite of an entrepreneurial mindset, right? So, let's just call it an employee mindset for the lack of a better word. it brings us to this idea that, you know, since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, we've been taught that we're going to work in an established organization controlled by others. We're going to fulfill a predetermined role in exchange for a paycheck, right? That's become so deeply ingrained in our belief system that we don't even know it's there. It's at the base of the iceberg, right? And that mindset served us well for a time. It helped build the United States into an economic powerhouse. But what I'm saying is that we're now at the end of an era where that way of thinking is now crippling our economic future. It's also crippling our psychological well-being. That's what's preventing us from reinventing ourselves. We're clinging to that old belief that someone else is going to tell us what to do. The cognitive psychologist Gary Klein equated it to like seeing in broad daylight. We're really good at seeing in broad daylight. We know how to do that. We know how to behave when the rules are clear and the path is well defined. And yet we're so often lost in the shadows of ambiguity and uncertainty and volatility, where the path is not clear and the rules are not well defined. And we're lost there not because we're incapable of functioning in the shadows, but we've never been trained to use those muscles, to think in those ways. We've been trained to fulfill predetermined roles. So when we look at the development of the individual entrepreneur, I sort of look at this as like developing human agency, right? And there are these sort of 5 constructs that we talk about in our work, and this is a little academic-y for a minute, but hang with me, right? So you see in the center of this is the individual, right? There's this individual assumption. It's up to me to figure out how to make myself useful to other humans. There it is, right? Okay. Now, as a result of that belief, over time, we start to develop a higher degree of self-efficacy, which is, you know, a belief in our own ability to navigate life, to face the ambient challenges in our environment, and so on and so forth, right? We develop an internal locus of control, a deeply held belief that we're the drivers, right? This is the opposite of an external locus of control, which is a deeply held belief that fate, luck, circumstances, or powerful others somehow control our circumstances. Let me back up one step. The opposite of self-efficacy is learned helpless, right? That's the spectrum there. So the entrepreneur also develops intrinsic motivation, right? That's sort of I'm intrinsically motivated. The task itself is rewarding. That's the opposite of extrinsic motivation, where I'm doing something for a separable reward, a letter grade, a gold star, $1, right? The literature is quite clear on this. People who are intrinsically motivated outperform people who are extrinsically motivated. So you start to understand why entrepreneurs behave the way they behave. We also see in the entrepreneur a growth mindset, and that's sort of, you know, a reference to Carol Dweck's. It's a deeply held belief that I can learn whatever I need to learn in order to grow, as opposed to my intelligence, my capabilities are fixed and there's nothing I can do about it. Lastly, we see a high degree of resiliency in the entrepreneur, and that comes from what psychologists call an optimistic explanatory style, right? When you get yourself in a fix, when you find yourself facing some challenge or adversity, what's the story you tell yourself, right? If you're telling yourself this is permanent, this is personal, this is pervasive, you're likely to be pessimistic. If you're telling yourself this is temporary, this is local, this is fixable, that's a more optimistic view. The point that I want to make here is that we see these attributes in experienced entrepreneurs, and we tend to make a fundamental attribution error, right? We think, oh, those are the things you need to be a successful entrepreneur. Well, that's what we got wrong. That's the fundamental attribution error. When you look at this entrepreneur when they started, they had very little, if any, of these things, right? The point here is that high self-efficacy, internal locus of control, intrinsic motivation, resilience, and a growth mindset are much more likely to be the effects of the behavior rather than the cause, right? It's a really, really important point, right? We tend to look at successful entrepreneurs as if they're somehow, unique individuals who have somehow been uniquely endowed with these traits. We fail to recognize those traits are the result rather than the cause of the behavior. They're the effect. That's really the point I want to dive into. And here's how you see this play out, right? So somebody has a company, they sell their company, or they're, something big and exciting happens in their company, and somebody interviews them. And then they come away and they write an article about, here's the 5 things or the 7 things or the 10 things or the 3 things you need to be a successful entrepreneur. It's ridiculous. The thing you need to be a successful entrepreneur is a compelling goal, right? That's really the distinguishing factor. And so some of you might be familiar with the work of Peter Senge or Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's work in flow. And I kind of mashed these 2 ideas together to make this quick graphic. Here's our current reality. Here's the compelling goal. We can talk later about what makes a goal compelling. But letter grades and dollars are not that compelling in the whole sphere of motivation, right? And so what happens in the pursuit of this compelling goal that's pursued autonomously, right? We develop competency and we get rewarded for the goal. Like, people acknowledge the value of the goal. Those are the 3 most compelling aspects of goal theory, right? It's really interesting when you think about this. In order to tap into the most potent form of human motivation, you have to be doing something that benefits other humans. That's not a moral teaching. That's hardwired into us as humans, right? My point is, the entrepreneur is in this tension system of optimal engagement. They're never bored. They're often anxious. They're being challenged above their skill level constantly, but they stay in this phase of optimal engagement because the goal is compelling, right? What happens to most of us? Over time, we become disengaged. We become bored because our skill exceeds the challenge, right? It's an interesting way to think about it. So, okay, that's kind of the philosophy and research, and that's really the heavy lifting in this webinar. I want to talk really briefly about how the course is structured, right? So in 2008, I had a chance to do a research project for the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute in San Jose, California. I got to go around the United States and interview several hundred entrepreneurs. And the Icehouse program became known for this. This one entrepreneur, it was inspired by one of the entrepreneurs. I'm kind of tripping over my words here. One of the entrepreneurs I met is Clifton Talbert. And I didn't know much about him when I met him. And he explained to me that he learned how to think like an entrepreneur as a little boy growing up in the Mississippi Delta in the 1950s, that he worked for his uncle that had an ice house. And he said it was his uncle that taught him how to think like an entrepreneur. And so that's where the Icehouse comes from. And the Icehouse, the name of the course, was inspired by this story. So, and that was, we had some initial funding from the Kauffman Foundation, and that was translated into a curriculum that became the Icehouse Entrepreneurship programs. So here's the basic structure, right? We wanted to redefine entrepreneurship in a way that everyone can embrace, and we've kind of done that in the program. We want to inspire the students by providing real-world examples of people that came from similar or worse circumstances. So there are video vignettes throughout the course, and you're sort of having the core concepts reinforced from the firsthand experience of other everyday entrepreneurs. It's an experiential program. So the people that take the program are immersed in real-world entrepreneurial experiences. The focus of the course is on the mindset, like keep connecting the behavior to the belief, right? It's the iceberg model. Like, what are they doing and why are they doing it? Like, what is the underlying belief that causes that behavior? We also encourage people to connect with the entrepreneurial community, right? We've inserted a number of case studies, if you will, that you can meet and hear from entrepreneurs in the program itself through video. But we want the student of the program to identify and interact with local entrepreneurs so they can kind of see how the sausage gets made, if you will. The important thing here is the relatable social models. That's the important piece here. And then lastly, we wanted to design a course that did not require the person who was leading the program or facilitating it to be a subject matter expert in entrepreneurship, right? One of the things we found in my research at Cisco was that the most effective entrepreneurship programs were taught by serial entrepreneurs, people that had started and built and sold multiple companies, and they intuitively understood it. And we quickly realized, like, this is not going to be able to scale if you need someone with that level of experience. So, you know, once you understand entrepreneurship as a discovery process, you can't really instruct discovery. It's more of a facilitated process anyway. So for any of you who are wondering, like, oh, can I teach this program and not be an expert in entrepreneurship? Absolutely. And we've gotten amazing results. We've trained more than 2,400 educators, business organizational leaders around the world how to deliver this program. And some of our most effective have come from people that couldn't spell the word entrepreneur. So a couple of basic things we want the students to experience. A small win, right? What Albert Bandura called an efficacy moment. We want them to feel the bat hit the ball once. We want them to interact with relatable social models. And that's a really important thing. You know, if you're coming out of corporate America and you're going to start your own business, man, it's frightening. You need to see other people that think and act like you in order to get you moving down this path. You need someone that believes in you, right? These are four things adapted from Albert Bandura's Guided Mastery, by the way. Like, you need mentors. And what we suggest is that you surround yourself with other entrepreneurs. You find mentors, people that have been, you know, through the ambiguity, know where the mines are buried. They know how to navigate like a Sherpa. And lastly, you've got to get a grip on your emotions. You got to be able to self-regulate. You got to be able to understand and direct your own life and become more self-aware. Core components of the course is really straightforward. There are 8 core concepts that we distilled from hundreds of interviews, more than a decade of research. Immerse the student in real-world experience and reinforce with relatable examples. That's really the formula for a facilitator who's going to teach the program. So I would like to spend a couple of minutes here just highlighting these 8 core concepts that we distilled from the interviews. And so we look at this as sort of the foundation of it is what we call the power to choose, right? And this is really asking the student, like, what are you aiming for? Like, what is it you're trying to accomplish? Like, what direction are you heading? And, you know, what's happening here is the locus of control is beginning to shift. If you talk to an entrepreneur, they, you know, almost to a person, they'll start to articulate some kind of a compelling goal. I alluded to this earlier, I'm going to say it again. The single most important distinguishing factor between the entrepreneurial and the non-entrepreneurial is a compelling goal. And that sort of activates our minds into a compelling future. It orients us towards a compelling moving forward, right? It's compelling, and it causes us to reach. It causes us to stretch just out to the edges of what we believe we're capable of. So that's sort of the foundation. We call it the power to choose. There's so much psychology to unpack there. I don't have time for it now. If you come to the training, we'll dig into it much deeper. So what we also observe from the entrepreneurs is they, how do they recognize opportunities the rest of us overlook? Well, it's really deceptively simple. They see problems as opportunities. Really, that's what the Icehouse is about, right? It's 1958, Mississippi Delta, it's hot, everyone needs ice. Now, there's some subtle underlying things happening here, right? Here's the recipe. I'm going to say this differently. Here's the recipe for failure. I want to open a coffee shop because I hate my job. I don't want to work too hard, right? That's all about me. There's no consideration for what problem I'm solving in my community, right? I want to do this thing because I like to do this thing. Well, that's great that you like to do it, but is there a need for it? Is there enough need that can sustain you in any kind of meaningful way, right? So the recipe for success is find the problem first and delve into the problem. I alluded to that earlier, right? It's problem finding. That's really one of the really important findings from our research is the successful entrepreneur finds the problem first. The failed entrepreneur finds a solution and then goes looking for the problem. So the next thing we've observed in the entrepreneur is the bias towards action, right? And to the uninitiated, this looks like recklessness. But underneath that, what appears to be recklessness is really a genius, which is what the entrepreneurs are doing is they're micro experimenting. They're talking to lots of people and they're trying lots of things, right? And it's really an organic way of surviving, right? I'm testing. We call this micro experimenting. That's how they're able to tease out opportunities that the rest of us can't see, right? If you're in business school, they teach you a different way of thinking. In business school, they teach you how to act upon opportunities that are present and quantifiable and visible. What the entrepreneurs do is tease out opportunities that are latent. They're not visible. They're present, but they're not visible. And they tease those out through what I call micro experimentation. The fourth thing we observe from the entrepreneurs is that they're constantly learning. They're unlearning and they're relearning, right? They have sort of this fluid understanding. They're not locked into any one way of thinking. They seem to be really exceptional at both creative and critical thinking, right? These are what we want in all of our students, right? But here's the key. They're not necessarily learning in a traditional way in a classroom with a book or a lecture. They're learning from their experiments. They're learning from their peers. They're learning from informal or formal network groups, from, audio books, from YouTube videos, from whatever. They're constantly learning. And so we see this as sort of the engine of like the mindset and the methods, right? Looking for problems to solve, trying things, and always learning. And, if I had to distill entrepreneurship down into 3 sentences, that would be it. You always got to be looking for problems to solve. You always got to be trying things, and you always got to be learning. My grown kids would roll their eyeballs if they heard me say this right now, because I said those 3 things to them so many times. Okay, so as a result of this activity, they tend to become very resourceful. They tend to become very reliable. They tend to create support communities, and they tend to develop resilience and the ability to persist, as I said, because the goal is so compelling. It's a very brief overview. There's a lot more to dig into in each of those. We don't have time for that today. We also immerse them in real-world entrepreneurial learning experiences. To put that in academic terms, it's experiential, project-based, peer-to-peer, and self-directed learning. If you observe the entrepreneur in the wild, that's exactly what they're doing. They don't know it's what they're doing. They don't say, hey, I'm going to go out and do some experiential problem-based learning today, or I'm going to go out and do some peer-to-peer learning. That's just the nature of entrepreneurial learning. Some folks call this expeditionary learning. I think it was the president of Olin College called it expeditionary learning. He described that as create your own knowledge and invent your own career. I really like that. The key here is learning how to solve ill-structured problems, right? And so many of us have learned to solve problems for which the answers are known. Somewhere in a book, somewhere in a formula, someone's got the formula. We just got to find the correct answer. And, you know, this is an increasingly pernicious problem in both K-12 and higher education, right? Students can, they know how to watch a lecture, read a book, and kind of spit back the key highlights from each. But they have a lot more trouble sort of putting complex ideas together and solving ill-structured problems, which can be defined as no one right answer. They're open-ended and complex. They're real world. They require collaboration. They continuously evolve with new information. They spark interest, controversy, and they engage with more questions, right? This is really a new form of learning for a lot of students. So we developed something called the Icehouse Opportunity Discovery Process. It's sort of a take on the business model canvas that's been simplified. As you look on the left over here, we've kind of broken the process down into the problem finding. And that just involves inquiry and observation. Once you understand the problem, then we get into phase 2 and start asking questions about experimentation and adaptation. And then in phase 3, it's about advocacy and implementation. Like once you have evidence that you have something useful, then and only then do you start advocating for the idea, right? And, you know, for most, evidence of usefulness is currency, right? Someone's opinion doesn't really matter. Someone invested in you, well, that's often a false proxy, right? What we're encouraging people to do is to seek evidence of usefulness. It doesn't have to be money or currency. It could be, you know, I have a blog with 20,000 subscribers. That's evidence of usefulness. Maybe you don't want to monetize it. That's fine. But you have evidence that you have something that's useful. That's the only point here. So in the training, if you come to our training, we'll, you know, go through this canvas in greater detail. It's a really simple tool. It's been used, you know, tens of thousands of students around the world have gone through this process. Lots of positive feedback from that. And then we reinforce the learning with case studies. And there's, you know, numerous examples in the course. Dawn Haffiker is a disabled veteran. Jason Campbell's a foster kid. This guy, Ryan Blair, was, you know, in the juvenile system. He met an entrepreneur, taught him how to think differently, became very successful. You might recognize this guy as Brian Scudamore. He's the founder of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, which he started as an 18-year-old kid with $1,000. A number of different examples. These are some students that were impacted by entrepreneurship education, and they're talking about their experience as well. So I'm going to just talk about the impact very briefly, and then we can ask, you know, have some time for Q&A. So we launched the Icehouse program in 2011, about 9 years ago, and since then it's taken off in ways I could have never, ever imagined. It's been, we now have a middle school version. It's been used in high schools, community colleges, four-year universities, economic development organizations, veteran initiatives, small business, reentry, workforce development, corporate learning and development, nonprofit organizations all over the world. There's so many different amazing examples of this program. We've been featured on NPR, CNN Money, USA Today, the Huffington Post. The Icehouse program was presented by Kaufman at a papal council for peace and justice at the Vatican. It was presented by a representative from Kaufman, Tom Rue, at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. I myself was invited to present it to the European Commission in Brussels a couple of years ago. Here's some of the outtakes, right? This is from the middle school version of the course, right? This is like 12 and 13-year-old kids, and this is some of the things they're saying. We can think about how we can change problems and opportunities. We can make Erie a better place. It's Erie, Pennsylvania. If you want to watch a video, if you look for a video called Icehouse Erie, you'll see, where I got this quote from. Prepa Tech in Mexico, about 7,500 students each year have gone through the Icehouse program with phenomenal outcomes there. That's just one of the big applications. We did a blind study at a community college in Colorado Springs, and we saw a 28% impact on student persistence, which shocked the president, Lance Bolton. He said, I thought it was 2.8%. They just left out the decimal point. And they went back and looked at the data. It was 28% increase. So in community colleges, about half the kids that show up in the first semester aren't there at the beginning of the second semester. The Icehouse students increased their persistence to the second semester by 28% against a control group. Now we're seeing statewide a commitment to the Icehouse program. We have an agreement now with all 9 career and technical community colleges in West Virginia for the Icehouse program. Another startling example is an instructor from a community college in New Mexico was invited to train city government workers how to think like entrepreneurs, which is now completely expanded. They're in the middle of, they're about 500 or 600 employees in now. They're committed to all 6,000 employees going through the Icehouse program. Now, you've heard me mention Tom Rue a few times. Tom was our program director at the Kaufman Foundation. He's now, this is Tom right here in this picture, he's now leading a foundation in NC IDEA in North Carolina. And he's launched a campaign to put 100,000 North Carolinians through the Icehouse program. We've trained about 200 facilitators so far in North Carolina. We're going to train about another 50 virtually here in the next month or so. Just another example of the people that are embracing this program. I don't want to end by saying we've developed a version of Icehouse for an average, someone to take the program that wants to start a business. There's a self-paced version that we've put together in this amazing learning platform called Teachable. It's straightforward. It's designed for someone that just wants to start a business, wants to reinvent themselves. That's what the Icehouse program, that the self-paced version, it's on our website. You can see it there. So if you want to learn how to become a facilitator, our next public online training is July 1st. It was sort of fortuitous. We've been doing these trainings all over the world for the last 9 years. And in this past February, we completed our first online training, which was very, very, very well received. We had about 30 people from all over the world. And now what we're seeing is people are signing up for this training much more so than the in-person face-to-face training. So our next online facilitator training is July 1st through the 22nd. There are 4 live sessions, and then there's a month where you kind of go through the whole cohort. There's an additional 2 months follow-on part of the training for the online training. So we also offer workshops, professional development programs, facilitated online. We have a number of different entrepreneurial mindset programs for educators, for organizational leaders, for you know, a number of different applications that are available. We can also, we're now getting lots of interest in doing private online training for organizations, for academic institutions. That's also happening. So I'm going to stop talking. If you want to learn more, I'm going to go ahead one slide and I'll back up. There's a lot of information at elimindset.com. That's where you can find all about our trainings, the Icehouse program. You can buy the book there. You can buy the book on Amazon. It's an Audible, paperback, hardcover, Kindle, whatever. So that's that. I want to go back to the questions. I've been doing a lot of talking. I want to stop talking now and open it up for questions. Joni, do we have some questions here?
No, all the questions is just about getting the recording and the slides that I've seen so far, which I will make sure the recording's got a process and everything for a bit, but I'll make sure that email goes out to everyone later this afternoon. But if anyone has anything else, feel free to send it in now.
Yeah, this is sort of the awkward silence where, you know, no one wants to be the first one to ask a question. So I'll just kind of wait for a second and see if there's any questions out there. Is this in Spanish? Paula, yes. There is a Spanish language version of the Icehouse program. I think, Joni, we still have the book in Spanish?
Yep, we do.
Okay, so the book is in Spanish, Casa de Hielo. There is a Spanish language version of the Icehouse program. So all the interviews are transcribed and so forth. So thank you, Paula. Great, Eddie, glad to know you enjoyed the presentation, Eddie, great, yes. You know, what I want to kind of engage with you, and I know, you know, we're at the hour, some of you have to go, but part of what I want to engage in is like why these skills, why these 8 entrepreneurial competencies are so important for this moment in time, right? That's really what this is about. Our country, our economy is being devastated by this, like not to mention our you know, health and well-being. But I think, you know, the time for this kind of learning has never been more important, is I guess what I want to kind of bring into the conversation. So Sally is asking, do you recommend that someone from our community become a facilitator in order to offer the program to our community? Yes, I do, Sally. I mean, that's what we're seeing in lots of communities. There's like an advocate or a champion that can lead courses. They can, you know, become an Icehouse champion in your community. That's working very well in a number of different communities across the globe. Maggie, thank you for these refreshers. How long will certified facilitators be allowed access to this information? Will it continue? Yes. So once you're a certified facilitator, it's like kind of like you're in the mafia. Like once you're in, there's no getting out, right? And you have access for a lifetime to all of our content. You're also allowed to like attend, you know, come back to the training at no charge, and that is, to my astonishment, we've had people come back to the training 3 times, and that's, you know, in person, sitting through a 3-day training program. So yes, Maggie, I hope that answers your question. Paula, this really made me think. I always thought because I do not have a master, I can't, but I know that I can. I am a serial entrepreneur. Paula, you're getting into it right there. I mean, this is, you know, something I'm writing about for my new book. It is the ways in which we've been conditioned to think that we need someone else to tell us how to make ourselves useful. And it really doesn't work that way. So Mimi is asking, how much does the program cost? So the facilitator training is $995. After that, for a small cohort, the course materials for the student are about $100 and $99 for the all digital program. I think it's $120 if you get the printed book with it. And then, we discount from there. There's wide, scale adoptions. We have, site licenses, which makes, drastically reduces the cost of the student material. So I hope that gives you a starting point, at least, Mimi. And thanks for the question. Joni, I see one question up in the Q&A. Thank you, Professor. Okay, it's the same question. Got it. Got it. Let me find my way back into the chat. Any other question about the Icehouse program? I just want to come back to this idea that this is the time for this, and that's really what the Icehouse program is about. Is when we figure out how to make ourselves useful to other humans, like that's where our power comes from, right? That's where our sense of agency comes from. And in many ways, we've just never learned how to do that without the guidance of another, right? What I mean by that is like we see that, getting another degree is the only way to make ourselves useful to other humans, and that following rules is the only way. And so that's what this idea sort of shifts that perspective. Like, it's up to me to figure out how to make myself useful. That doesn't mean I don't need another degree. That just means I'm in the driver's seat. I'm pursuing something that's compelling to me. And thank you, Joni, for putting that in there, our contact information. You can also follow me on Twitter. It's at, I don't even know what my Twitter handle is, Joni. Do you? Is it at Gary Show or something like that? You can find
at
me.
G. Schoeniger.
Yeah, at G. Schoeniger. Thank you. Embarrassing. I don't even know my own Twitter, but you can find us on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
At Eli Mindset on Twitter.
Yeah, you can also find us at Eli Mindset. Thanks, Joni. All right, any final questions? If not, stay safe. I hope this was a good use of your time. If you have any follow-up questions, by all means, reach out to me or Joni. We will send all of you this recorded presentation along with the slides and a follow-up email in the next 24 hours. So again, stay safe. Thanks for watching. Hope to talk to you soon.